The night is absolute. No moon, just fog rolling across the shell-cratered landscape between the lines somewhere in northern France. Early spring 1918, the German assault troops wait in their forward positions, faces darkened with burnt cork and mud. Equipment taped down to eliminate noise, they wear no packs. Everything they carry is for killing or breaching. At 0430, the bombardment begins, not the days-long barges of 1916. This is 5 minutes of violent concentrated fury, high explosive gas, smoke. The shells walk across the British trench system in a planned sequence, hitting communication trenches first, then command posts, then registered machine gun positions. Counter-battery fire seeks out the enemy guns. The noise is apocalyptic but brief, then silence. A terrible ringing silence. The assault groups move forward in the dark. No lines, no waves. Small teams of 8 to 12 men spread across a frontage, each with a specific task. They move through gaps in the wire the engineers cut in the night. They bypass the first strong points entirely, leaving them isolated, pushing deeper. Speed is everything. Confusion is a weapon. A British trench materializes out of the fog. The defenders are still stunned, ears bleeding from the shelling, trying to understand what is happening. The first German soldier over the parapet throws a stick grenade into the traverse. The blast is muffled by sandbags and earth. Before the smoke clears, 2 more stormtroopers are in the trench, pistols drawn, moving fast. They clear the bay in seconds. A whistle blast. The next team moves past them, heading for the next objective. This is not a battle of lines, this is surgery. Bypassing resistance, severing communications, killing officers and artillery observers, isolating machine gun posts and reducing them from the flank or rear. A flamethrower team burns out a concrete bunker. Pioneers blow a dugout entrance with a satchel charge. Light machine gunners set up hasty positions to cover the advance, then displace forward. Within 20 minutes, the German assault troops are half a kilometre into the British defences. Behind them, follow-on infantry begin the grim work of clearing bypassed positions. Ahead, the stormtroopers push deeper, always deeper, exploiting shock, maintaining tempo. They will advance until they collapse from exhaustion or run into reserves they cannot break. This is not 1914. This is not masked infantry walking into machine guns. This is something new. Something that will echo through a century of warfare. By 1918, Germany had learned to fight like the 20th century, one trench, one bunker, one squad at a time. In August 1914, the German army marched into Belgium and France with a plan built on speed, manoeuvre, and decisive battle. Within months, that plan lay in ruins. The Schlieffen Plan had failed. The war of movement froze into stalemate. From the Swiss border to the English Channel, 2 vast armies faced each other across a landscape of wire, mud, and fortified trench systems that grew deeper and more complex with every passing month. The problem was brutally simple. Modern firepower, machine guns, rapid-firing artillery, magazine rifles had made frontal assault into industrial slaughter. Defenders could kill attackers faster than attackers could close the distance. Barbed wire channeled assaults into kill zones. Artillery turned no man's land into a moonscape. Attacking infantry advanced in waves, and those waves broke apart under fire, leaving thousands dead in the open ground. The Battle of the Somme in 1916 crystallized the horror. On the first day, the British suffered nearly 60,000 casualties. Many divisions lost half their strength in hours. The Germans dug into deep bunkers and fortified positions, mowed down the attackers with methodical efficiency. But Germany could not simply defend forever. The Entente had more men, more industry, more resources. The Royal Navy's blockade was strangling the German economy. Time favoured the Allies, and Germany needed a way to break the stalemate without bleeding itself to death. Mass attacks failed. Artillery preparations lasting days or weeks achieved nothing except warning the enemy exactly where the attack would come. Poison gas created local advantages, but no strategic breakthrough. Tanks were still primitive. The answer, if there was one, would have to come from tactics, from rethinking how infantry fought at the smaller scales. The German army, for all its authoritarian reputation, had a culture that rewarded initiative and allowed junior officers and NCOs to experiment. The concept of off-tracks tactic, mission-type orders meant that subordinates were told what to achieve, not how to achieve it. This cultural framework made innovation possible. Out of desperation and incremental experimentation across multiple fronts, a new kind of warfare began to emerge. It started with raids. Small-scale night attacks to capture prisoners, gather intelligence, or destroy specific positions. These raids taught hard lessons. Large groups were easy to detect and suppress. Speed mattered more than numbers. Suppressive fire from light machine guns allowed movement. Grenades were more useful in trenches than rifles. Surprise could substitute for mass. Bypassing strongpoints was faster than reducing them. By 1915, German units on the western and eastern fronts were forming ad hoc assault detachments, stores, to conduct these raids. The methods were informal, passed along through experience refined in blood. But there was no unified doctrine, no systematic training, no standardized equipment that would come next. The crisis demanded innovation. The stormtroopers were Germany's answer. Not an elite force in the modern sense, but a tactical system designed to make infantry effective again in the age of the machine gun. The man most associated with the birth of the stormtroopers is Hauptmann Willi Rohr. A combat engineer officer, Rohr had seen action early in the war and understood the limitations of conventional assault tactics. In March 1915, he was tasked with forming an experimental unit that would test new methods, weapons, and training for trench warfare. This unit became Battalion No. 5, better known simply as Stew Battalion Rohr. Rohr's battalion was established near Berwitt in eastern France, initially as part of the German Fifth Army. It was not a large formation, perhaps a few hundred men at first, but its purpose was radical. Rohr was given unusual freedom to recruit volunteers, experiment with tactics, and develop a training program from the ground up. The men were drawn from across the army, often combat veterans, NCOS with proven initiative, and soldiers willing to take on extremely dangerous work. What made Rohr's approach different was its systematic nature. Previous units had been improvised at the divisional or corps level, formed for specific operations and then disbanded. Rohr's battalion was permanent. It was a laboratory. Tactics were tested, refined, and documented. Weapons were evaluated in real conditions. Training methods were developed and standardized. Importantly, Rohr's unit was also a school. Officers and NCOs from other formations rotated through for training, then returned to their parent units to spread the new methods. The early doctrine emphasized several core principles. First, small unit action, squads of 8 to 12 men, not companies in line. Second, combined arms at the lowest level. Each assault group included grenadiers, riflemen, light machine gunners, and engineers. Third, aggression and initiative. Junior leaders were expected to make decisions without waiting for orders. Fourth, rehearsal. Attacks were practiced on mock-up trench systems built to replicate the actual objective. Rohr's men trained with live ammunition. They crawled through wire under machine gun fire. They threw grenades in confined spaces. They learned to move at night without lights, to navigate by compass, to identify weak points in enemy positions through reconnaissance. The training was brutal. Men were injured or killed in exercises, but the survivors became instructors and the method spread. By late 1915, other formations were copying Rohr's model. The Sturm Battalion concept expanded. Additional assault battalions were raised and divisional-level store-up companies became common. The German High Command recognized that infiltration tactics could not remain the province of a few specialist units. These methods needed to become standard infantry doctrine. The dissemination process was deliberate. Experienced stormtroopers were rotated to regular infantry divisions as advisors. Training manuals were written and distributed. Divisional assault schools were established across the Western Front. By 1917, the German army was systematically retraining its infantry in the new methods. What had begun as Rohr's experiment was becoming the German way of war. But Rohr was not alone. On the Eastern Front, commanders like General Oskar von Hutier were developing complementary tactics, short, violent artillery preparations followed by deep infiltration attacks. The successes at Ria in September 1917 demonstrated the potential of these methods on a larger scale. Hutier's Eighth Army broke through Russian defences using surprise, concentrated firepower, and aggressive exploitation by specially trained assault units. The genius of the German approach was synthesis. Ideas from multiple fronts, multiple commanders, and multiple experiments were combined into a coherent system. Rohr provided the tactical foundation. Huya provided the operational concept. Doctrine writers at the High Command provided the manuals. When you study the First World War closely, something unsettling becomes clear. Europe in 1914 was the most advanced civilization humanity had ever built. Electric cities, telegraph networks, universities, art and philosophy. A continent that believed it had finally mastered progress. And then in just 4 years it almost destroyed itself. Libraries burned, cathedrals collapsed, entire generations of scientists, engineers, poets and thinkers were wiped out in the mud of Flanders and Galicia. So much knowledge did not just fade, it vanished. That fragility is something I think about constantly when I work on these films. That is why this project genuinely caught my attention. It is called The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization by Hungry Minds, an international group of artists, scientists, architects and designers who asked a haunting question. If everything collapsed, how would humanity build it all back? This is not just a book, it is a 400-page visual encyclopedia of human ingenuity, moving from ancient construction and metallurgy to flight, navigation, medicine and astronomy. It covers over 180 topics across 23 chapters, all illustrated in this striking blend of medieval manuscript art and precise engineering drawings. What struck me most is how much of it feels like the kind of knowledge Europe almost lost in the trenches of 1914 to 1918. Early aviation, mechanical systems, star charts, architectural engineering. These were the same disciplines the First World War both accelerated and nearly annihilated. Even the physical book feels different. The thick matte paper and the solid laminated hardcover make it feel less like a modern product and more like a manual recovered from a ruined world. There is even a hidden quest woven into its pages, a puzzle that rewards careful readers. It turns the book into something you explore rather than just read. This project raised over $2.3 million from people around the world, involved more than 50 creators, and became an international bestseller published by Marsilio Arte in Italy. You can see why as soon as you hold it. It is the kind of book that reminds you what civilization really is. Fragile, brilliant, and worth preserving. So if you love history, or if the First World War made you think differently about humanity and progress, I think you will find this fascinating. You can find The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding a Civilization by Hungry Minds through the link in the description. There is a special offer available through that link. It is not just a book, it is a reminder of everything the world once almost lost. By early 1918, Germany had a new way of attacking, a way that emphasized tempo, decentralization, and violence of action at the point of contact. The stormtroopers were no longer an experiment. They were the spearhead of Germany's last hope for victory. A stormtrooper in 1918 looked different from the infantryman of 1914. The long rifle was often replaced by the Carabiner 98A, a shorter carbine, easier to handle in trenches. Many carried pistols, often the Luger P08, but also captured revolvers or the Mauser C96. These were close-quarters weapons. Rifles were for open-ground combat. In the confined spaces of trench systems, a pistol and a bag of grenades made more sense. The grenade was the stormtrooper's signature weapon. The iconic steel hand granite, the stick grenade, was perfect for throwing around traverses and into dugouts. Each man carried multiple grenades, often a dozen or more, hung from his belt and webbing. Some grenades were offensive types designed to produce blast without excessive fragmentation, useful when attacking in the open. Others were defensive, heavier, intended for use from cover. Stormtroopers learned to cook grenades, holding them after pulling the fuse to reduce the enemy's reaction time. Satchel charges and Bangalore torpedoes were standard for engineers and pioneers embedded in assault teams. These men were responsible for breaching wire, blowing bunkers and demolishing obstacles. They carried explosives, fuses and detonators along with wire cutters and specialized tools. Their role was not glamorous, but it was essential. Without engineers, the assault stalled. Light machine guns provided mobile firepower. The MG-08/15, a lighter version of the standard German machine gun, could be carried and operated by a two-man team. It was not as light as later designs, but it was vastly more mobile than the tripod-mounted MG-08. Stormtroop tactics relied on suppressive fire to enable movement. Machine gunners would set up hasty positions, pour fire into enemy positions or approach routes, then displaced forward as the assault progressed. Flamethrowers, Flammenfer, were psychological weapons as much as physical ones. A man burning alive in a bunker could not fight. The terror induced by flamethrowers often caused defenders to surrender or flee, but flamethrower operators were vulnerable. The fuel tanks were heavy and explosive. The range was short. These weapons were used selectively against specific hardpoints that could not be easily bypassed. Body armour saw limited use. Some stormtroopers wore the Panzer, a heavy steel breastplate designed for trench raids. It could stop pistol rounds and shrapnel, but was cumbersome and exhausting to wear. Snipers and sentries used steel shields with vision slits. The Stahlhelm, the iconic German steel helmet introduced in 1916, was universal. It saved lives. Head wounds dropped significantly after its introduction. Stormtroopers travelled light, no packs. Food, water and ammunition were carried in bandoliers, pouches and pockets. Maps, compasses, signal flares and whistles were standard. Communication was a persistent problem. Field telephones required wire, which broke under shelling. Runners were used, but runners could be killed. Flares signalled success or called for support, but they also revealed positions. Stormtroop attacks often outran their communications, creating chaos and opportunity in equal measure. The training regimen was unforgiving. Men practiced assault drills repeatedly, moving through mock trench systems built to replicate actual enemy positions. They learned to move in bounds, one element covering while another advanced. They practiced immediate action drills, what to do when encountering unexpected resistance. They coordinated with artillery observers, learning the timing of rolling barges and the limitations of indirect fire support. Physical conditioning was extreme. Stormtroopers needed endurance to carry heavy loads at speed, to fight in close combat, to keep moving when exhausted. They trained at night in bad weather under live fire. Casualties during training were accepted as necessary. The alternative was higher casualties in combat. The psychological component was equally important. Stormtroopers were taught to be aggressive, to press forward, to never allow the enemy time to recover. Hesitation was death. The enemy had to be kept off balance, reacting, never allowed to organize a coherent defense. This required discipline and brutality in equal measure. Mercy was not a luxury available in the heat of a trench fight. Leadership was decentralized. Squad leaders and section commanders made tactical decisions in real time. They could not wait for orders from above. The situation changed too fast. Off-track tactic, mission-type orders meant they knew the objective and the intent, but were trusted to determine the method. This required intelligent, experienced junior leaders. Germany spent heavily on training NCOs and junior officers. These men were force multipliers. The culture of the stormtroopers was distinct. They saw themselves as elite, not in a social sense, but in a functional one. They were the tip of the spear. They accepted high casualties as the price of effectiveness. There was pride in the role, but also realism. Many did not expect to survive the war. This combination, specialized weapons, intensive training, decentralized leadership, and aggressive doctrine, created a new kind of soldier. Not a Superman, not invincible, but vastly more effective than the mass infantry formations of 1914. The stormtroopers were the German army's answer to the tactical problem of trench warfare. Understanding how a stormtrooper attack actually worked requires stepping through the process in sequence. Modern viewers often imagine WWI battles as chaotic, unplanned bloodbaths. In reality, by 1917, German assault tactics were highly structured, rehearsed, and methodical. The violence was organized. It began with reconnaissance. Days or weeks before an attack, patrols infiltrated no man's land to map enemy positions. They identified machine gun nests, artillery observation posts, command bunkers, communication trenches, and wire belts. They noted patrol patterns, relief schedules, and weak points. Prisoners were captured for interrogation. Aerial reconnaissance provided photographic intelligence. Artillery observers logged enemy battery positions. This intelligence was compiled into detailed terrain models and maps. Once the objective was selected, the assault was rehearsed. Behind the lines, training areas replicated the target trench system using tapes, stakes, and earthworks. Assault teams walked through the attack plan repeatedly. Timing was synchronized. Each squad knew its route, its objective, and its relationship to adjacent units. Officers and NCOS studied the terrain until they could navigate it in the dark. Artillery preparation was the next phase, but not the artillery of the SO. German doctrine by 1918 emphasized surprise over prolonged bombardment. The preparation might last only a few hours, sometimes as little as 30 minutes. The goal was not to destroy the enemy, but to neutralize him long enough for the assault troops to close. The bombardment followed a precise program. First, counter-batter fire targeted enemy artillery to prevent defensive fire during the assault. Then, gas shells hit RI areas, headquarters, supply dumps, reserve positions. Gas forced defenders to wear masks, degrading their ability to fight and communicate. Smoke shells obscured observation. High explosive shells hit known strong points, not to demolish them, but to stun the defenders and cut wire. The fire walked forward in a rolling barrage, a curtain of explosions that advanced at a predetermined rate, usually 50 to 100 meters every few minutes. The assault troops followed closely behind, sometimes within 50 meters of the bursting shells. This required discipline and trust in the artillery timetable. Men were killed by their own guns, but the trade-off was acceptable. Defenders could not man their positions until the barrage passed, and by then, the stormtroopers were already in the trenches. The assault itself was executed by multiple echelons, each with a specific role. The first wave consisted of small assault squads, typically 8 to 12 men. Their mission was penetration. They moved fast, exploiting gaps in the wire and weak points in the defences. They did not stop to fight. Strong points were bypassed. If they encountered resistance, they used grenades and close-quarters weapons to suppress or eliminate it, then kept moving. Their goal was depth, not width. They pushed as far and as fast as possible, sowing confusion, severing communications, killing officers and artillery crews. Following the assault squads were light machine gun teams. These moved forward to positions where they could cover the assault and suppress enemy responses. They set up hasty positions, poured fire into likely counterattack routes, or bypassed strong points, then displaced forward as the assault line advanced. The machine guns provided the mobile firepower that allowed the assault teams to keep moving. Engineers and pioneers accompanied the assault, responsible for breaching obstacles, demolishing bunkers, and clearing paths for follow-on forces. They carried explosives, flamethrowers, and specialized tools. When a bypassed bunker needed to be reduced, engineers handled it. When a communication trench needed to be blocked to prevent reinforcement, engineers blew it. Their work was methodical and brutal. Behind the first echelons came the follow-on infantry, regular line battalions, not stormtroopers. Their mission was to consolidate. They cleared the bypassed strong points left by the assault teams, a grinding, dangerous process of grenade fights and close combat. They occupied captured trenches, reversed the parapets to face the enemy rear, and set up defensive positions against the inevitable counterattack. They brought forward supplies, ammunition, and additional machine guns. The entire system depended on a few key principles. First, bypass resistance, do not get pinned down. If a strong point could not be quickly overwhelmed, go around it. Leave it for the follow-on troops. Maintain momentum. Second, exploit success. Do not reinforce failure. If one assault group broke through while another stalled, send reserves to the breakthrough, not the stalled attack. Widen the gap. Deepen the penetration. Third, isolate, then reduce. Cut off enemy positions from communication and reinforcement. Attack them from multiple directions. Use the defender's trench system against him, moving through his own communication trenches to strike from unexpected angles. Fourth, consolidate quickly. Once an objective was taken, immediately prepare for counterattack. German doctrine assumed the enemy would counterattack. Captured positions were fortified. Machine guns were in place. Observers were posted. Defensive fire plans were prepared. The assault was only half the battle. Holding the ground was the other half. The tactical vocabulary developed by German doctrine is worth defining clearly. Infiltration meant bypassing strong points and penetrating deep into enemy defences, creating pockets of isolated resistance. Breakthrough meant creating a rupture in the enemy line, wide enough and deep enough to allow exploitation. Penetration meant achieving depth without necessarily achieving width. Exploitation meant pushing reserves through the gap to attack rear areas, logistics, and headquarters. The limits of the system were real and brutal. Assault troops advanced faster than artillery could keep up. The rolling barrage was timed, but terrain, resistance, and exhaustion disrupted the timetable. Once the assault outran the barrage, it lost its covering fire. Communications broke down, runners were killed, telephone wire was cut by shell fire, higher headquarters lost contact with the assault, resupply failed, ammunition ran out, men collapsed from exhaustion, counterattacks hit flanks and cut off advanced units. The genius of the stormtrooper system was not that it eliminated these problems, it accepted them as inevitable and designed tactics that could function despite them. Small units with decentralized leadership could continue to fight even when cut off from higher command. Soldiers trained in combined arms could improvise solutions. Aggression and tempo substituted for perfect coordination. By 1918, the German army had created a tactical system that could punch through the strongest defences. Whether it could achieve strategic victory was another question entirely. Theory is one thing. Application on the battlefield is another. The true test of German stormtrooper doctrine came in actual operations against actual enemies under real conditions. Several battles stand out as demonstrations of both the power and limitations of these tactics. Capato, officially the 12th Battle of the Iso, began on the 24th of October 1917 on the Italian front. The Italians had battered themselves against Austro-Hungarian positions for 2 years with little success. Germany sent reinforcements including experienced stormtrooper units and commanders trained in the new infiltration methods. The attack was commanded by General Otto von Below, with the German 14th Army leading the assault. The preparation was textbook German doctrine, a short, violent bombardment featuring gas, smoke, and high explosive. The gas was particularly effective against Italian troops, many of whom lacked proper masks or training in gas discipline. When the assault came, German and Austro-Hungarian stormtroopers infiltrated through the Italian lines, bypassing strongpoints, pushing deep into the rear. The Italian Second Army collapsed. Within hours, the front line disintegrated. Italian units found themselves surrounded, cut off from supply and communication. Panic spread. Entire divisions retreated in disorder. The Central Powers advanced over 20 kilometers in the first day, an unthinkable distance on the Western Front. By the time the offensive ended in mid-November, the Italians had lost 300,000 men, most of them prisoners, and retreated over 100 kilometers to the Paved River. Caporetto demonstrated the operational potential of stormtrooper tactics. Small unit infiltration combined with operational surprise and psychological shock achieved a breakthrough that conventional methods could not. It validated the doctrine. German commanders took careful notes, but Capato also revealed limitations. The advance eventually stalled due to logistical breakdown. The Germans and Austro-Hungarians outran their supply lines. Artillery could not keep up. Ammunition and food ran short. The Italians, reinforced by French and British divisions, stabilized a new line. The breakthrough did not lead to strategic collapse. Italy remained in the war. The lessons learned at Caporetto were applied to the Western Front in 1918. Germany faced a strategic dilemma. The blockade was tightening. American forces were arriving in France in growing numbers. Time was running out. If Germany could not achieve victory in 1918, it would lose. The German High Command gambled on a massive offensive, Operation Michael, the first of the spring offensives. Michael began on 21st March 1918, targeting the British Fifth Army along the SO. The bombardment started at 0440 and lasted 5 hours. Over 6,000 guns fired nearly 1 million shells. Gas saturated British rear areas. Smoke blinded observation posts. High explosive pounded trenches and strong points. The noise was beyond comprehension. At 0940, the stormtroopers attacked. The assault was conducted by specially trained divisions, including units rotated through assault schools and divisions that had fought at Ria and Capato. They moved forward into fog so thick visibility was measured in meters. The British defenders, stunned by the bombardment and blinded by the fog, could not form a coherent defence. German assault squads bypassed strong points, infiltrated through gaps and pushed deep into British positions. Machine gun teams suppressed resistance, pioneers blew obstacles, follow-on infantry cleared, bypassed positions. The British line buckled, then broke in multiple places. By the end of the first day, the Germans had advanced up to 8 kilometers in some sectors, an extraordinary achievement by Western Front standards. The advance continued for days. Towns fell. Entire British divisions were shattered. The Germans captured enormous quantities of supplies and equipment. By the end of March, They had advanced nearly 60 kilometers, the greatest German advance since 1914. Panic gripped Allied headquarters. The French and British feared Paris itself might fall, but Michael did not win the war. The advance slowed, then stopped. The Germans could not sustain the tempo. Artillery lagged behind, supply lines stretched to breaking. The stormtroopers, exhausted and bleeding, could not continue. British and French reserves arrived. The line stabilized. By early April, the offensive was over. Germany had gained ground, but not victory. Subsequent offensives, Georgette in April, Blucher-York in May, Geneseo in June, followed similar patterns. Initial success, deep penetrations, then stalling, counterattacks, and stalemate. The tactical system worked. The operational vision was sound, but Germany lacked the resources to exploit success. Each offensive burned through irreplaceable assault troops. Each advance created vulnerable salients. Each success consumed men and material Germany could not replace. Stormtrooper tactics also played a defensive role, though this is less well known. German doctrine by 1918 emphasized defense in depth. A system of thinly held outpost zones, main defensive zones with interlocking fields of fire, and counterattack forces held in reserve. When Allied forces attacked, they often penetrated the outpost zone only to be hit by counterattacks from stormtroop units held in reserve. These counterattacks used the same infiltration methods as offensive operations, small units bypassing resistance, striking weak points, sowing confusion. During the 100 Days offensive in autumn 1918, when the Allies broke through German lines repeatedly, German stormtroop units often conducted desperate counterattacks or fighting withdrawals that delayed the advance. They could not stop the Allied steamroller, but they made it costly. Even in defeat, the tactics remained effective at the tactical level. The battles of 1918 proved that German stormtrooper doctrine was the most sophisticated infantry tactical system of the war. It could achieve breakthroughs that were impossible in 1916. But tactics cannot overcome strategy. Germany was outnumbered, outproduced, and starving. No amount of tactical brilliance could change those realities. The popular image of stormtroopers often carries a sheen of glamour, elite troops highly trained, fearsome. The reality was harsher. Stormtrooper service was a death sentence on the installment plan. Assault units took disproportionate casualties. They were always at the point of contact, always leading attacks, always in the most dangerous positions. During the spring offensives of 1918, stormtrooper divisions suffered catastrophic losses. Some units lost 50% or more of their assault troops in the first weeks of fighting. The replacements were often poorly trained, drawn from rear area units or conscripts lacking the experience and skill of the men they replaced. The training regimen created casualties before combat even began. Left fire exercises killed men. Training accidents were common. Men were injured learning to throw grenades, operate flamethrowers, or breach wire under fire. The German army accepted these losses as necessary. Better to lose men in training than in combat where their failure endangered others. The psychological toll was immense. Stormtroopers experienced combat at its most brutal. Close quarters, fighting with knives, entrenching tools, and pistols. They cleared bunkers with flamethrowers. They fought in darkness and fog. They saw friends blown apart by grenades or cut down by machine gun fire at point-blank range. Shell shock, what we now call combat stress or PTSD, was common, though rarely diagnosed or treated. The physical demands were crushing. Assaults required carrying heavy loads at speed across broken ground. Men advanced through mud, over shell craters, through wire, under fire. They fought until exhausted, then kept fighting. Sleep deprivation was routine. Food was irregular, water was scarce, sanitation was impossible. Disease killed men as surely as bullets. Leadership attrition was particularly severe. Junior officers and NCOS led from the front in stormtrooper units. They were shot first, targeted deliberately by enemy soldiers who recognized their authority. Replacing experienced leaders was difficult. Leadership could not be taught quickly. It required time, training, and survival. As experienced leaders died, the quality of assault units declined. The myth of the stormtrooper as elite soldier obscures this reality. Yes, they were highly trained. Yes, they were effective. But they were also expendable. German doctrine treated stormtroopers as shock troops in the most literal sense. Forces used to deliver violent impact expected to suffer heavy losses, then withdrawn or replaced. This was not a sustainable system. Germany's strategic situation made the problem worse. Each offensive in 1918 consumed assault divisions that could not be replaced. The men killed or wounded in March were not available for the offensives in April, May, or June. Germany was burning through its best infantry at a rate it could not sustain. Supply failures compounded casualties. Stormtroopers advancing rapidly often outran their logistics. They ran out of ammunition in the midst of enemy positions. They had no food, no water. Medical evacuation was impossible. Wounded men were left behind or died of exposure. Even successful attacks became death traps when the assault stalled and counterattacks hit the flanks. The evidence is in the numbers. German casualties in the spring offensives totaled nearly 1 million men. Many of these were stormtroopers or assault infantry. By summer 1918, Germany no longer had effective assault divisions. The tactical system remained sound, but the men trained to execute it were dead or broken. The cost extended beyond individual soldiers. Families back in Germany received telegrams. Towns lost entire cohorts of young men. The social fabric frayed. The blockade meant widows and orphans faced starvation. The human cost of the stormtrooper system was not limited to the battlefield. In retrospect, the stormtroopers were victims of strategic failure. Their tactical successes could not overcome Germany's industrial and numerical inferiority. They were asked to do the impossible, to win a war that could not be won through tactical means alone. They came closer than anyone expected, but close was not enough. The myth of the elite stormtrooper persists because myths are comforting. The reality is that these men were highly trained soldiers used in high-risk roles where survival was improbable. They were effective. They were also mortal. War consumed them as it consumed millions of others. To understand the connection between WWI stormtroopers and modern special forces, it is essential to define terms carefully. Stormtroopers were not special forces in the contemporary sense. They were not strategic assets conducting independent operations behind enemy lines. They were not small, secretive units operating with political objectives. They were tactical assault infantry integrated into mass armies. But the methods they pioneered became the foundation of modern small unit tactics, and those methods are now standard in special operations. The first parallel is small unit initiative. Stormtrooper doctrine required squad leaders to make tactical decisions in real time without waiting for orders. This is the essence of modern special operations. A Navy SEAL team or SAS patrol operates with mission-type orders. They know the objective and the intent, but the execution is left to the team leader. This decentralization allows adaptation to changing conditions and exploits opportunities as they arise. The second parallel is combined arms at the micro level. A modern special forces team includes specialists, breachers, snipers, medics, communications experts, weapon specialists. Each brings a capability. Together, they can execute complex missions. Stormtrooper assault squads operated on the same principle. Grenadiers provided shock action. Machine gunners provided suppression. Engineers provided the breaching. The combination was greater than the sum of its parts. The third parallel is training intensity. Modern special forces undergo months or years of selection and training far exceeding standard infantry. Stormtroopers underwent weeks or months of specialized training beyond their initial infantry training. The emphasis on live-fire exercises, rehearsals, and realistic scenarios is identical. The modern kill house and close-quarters battle drills are direct descendants of German trench-clearing training. The fourth parallel is the emphasis on shock and tempo. Modern special operations doctrine, particularly in direct action missions, prioritizes speed and violence of action. Hostage rescues, raids, and assaults succeed through overwhelming force applied at a decisive point in a compressed time frame. Stormtroopers operated on the same principle. The goal was to hit the enemy before he could react, to maintain tempo, to never allow him time to recover. The fifth parallel is mission rehearsal. Modern special forces rehearse missions obsessively, building mock-ups, walking through every phase, synchronizing, timing. Stormtroopers did the same. The German emphasis on terrain models and full-scale rehearsals is now standard practice in elite units worldwide. The differences are also important. Modern special forces are strategic assets. They conduct operations with national-level implications: counter-terrorism, hostage rescue, direct action against high V-value targets, special reconnaissance. Stormtroopers were tactical assets. Their missions were local: take a trench, capture a bunker, break a defensive line. Modern special forces are small and selective. A nation might have thousands of special operators out of millions of service members. Germany in 1918 had hundreds of thousands of stormtroopers. They were not rare, they were the cutting edge of mass armies. Modern special forces operate independently, often in small teams, sometimes in denied or hostile territory. Stormtroopers operated as a part of larger formations, always supported by artillery, follow-on infantry and logistics. But the DNA is undeniable. The tactical methods pioneered by German stormtroopers in World War I influenced interwar military thinking across Europe. The Soviets studied infiltration tactics and incorporated them into their deep operations doctrine. The Germans themselves expanded these concepts in World War II, particularly in the early years of the war. Phalam assaults and panzer grenadier tactics owed debts to stormtroop doctrine. Post-World War II, as special forces emerged as distinct organisations, they drew on this legacy. British commandos, US Army Rangers, and later units like the SAS and Delta Force absorbed lessons from infiltration warfare. Room-clearing techniques, immediate action drills, and combined arms at the team level all trace lineage back to the trenches of 1917 and 1918. The US Army's Ranger Handbook and British doctrine manuals on small unit tactics contain echoes of German WWI assault methods, often transmitted through intermediate sources, but recognisable to anyone familiar with the original. The emphasis on aggression, initiative and speed has not changed. Modern counter-terrorism tactics, particularly hostage rescue, closely resemble stormtrooper methodology. Breaching doors with explosives, clearing rooms with speed and suppressive fire, isolating targets, consolidating on objectives. These are stormtrooper tactics adapted to buildings instead of trenches. The claim that Germany invented modern special forces requires careful qualification. Germany did not invent the institutional structure or strategic role of special forces that came later developed by Britain, the United States and others, but Germany did invent the tactical toolkit that special forces now use, the methods, the mindset, the training philosophy. These are the legacy of the stormtroopers. The armistice of November 1918 ended the war, but not the influence of stormtrooper tactics. The methods developed on the Western Front spread through military institutions worldwide, sometimes overtly, sometimes subtly. In Germany, the Reich, the post-war army limited by the Treaty of Versailles, absorbed the lessons deeply. German doctrine in the interwar period emphasized mobility, initiative, and combined arms. The early campaigns of World War II showcased these principles at scale. Blitzkrieg, though driven by tanks and aircraft, relied on infantry tactics that descended directly from stormtrooper methods. German infantry in 1940 moved with similar aggression and decentralization as their predecessors in 1918. The Soviets studied German tactics intensely. Soviet deep operations doctrine developed in the 1930s incorporated infiltration concepts. The emphasis on maintaining tempo, exploiting success, and avoiding frontal assaults against strong points reflected lessons learned from the German experience. Western armies were slower to adapt. The French clung to defensive doctrine, building the Maginot Line. The British experimented with mechanization but retained much of their WWI institutional culture. The Americans, latecomers to World War I, absorbed some lessons but also developed their own doctrines based on industrial firepower. World War II forced rapid evolution. Infantry tactics across all armies became more sophisticated. Room clearing, close quarters battle, and assault techniques improved. By 1945, most armies had absorbed elements of infiltration doctrine, whether they acknowledged the source or not. Post-war, the emergence of special forces as distinct organisations created units that embodied stormtrooper principles institutionally. The British SAS formed in World War II and retained post-war emphasised small unit operations, initiative and direct action. The US Army's Special Forces, established in the 1950s, combined unconventional warfare with direct action capabilities. that mirrored stormtrooper methods, and Vietnam saw these tactics applied in jungle environments. Long-range reconnaissance patrols, ambushes, and raids used principles of surprise, speed, and violence of action. The lessons learned in Southeast Asia further refined small unit doctrine. The counter-terrorism era brought stormtrooper tactics into urban environments. Hostage rescue units like Germany's GSG-9, Britain's SAS, and the US's Delta Force developed building entry techniques that paralleled trench-clearing methods. The same principles applied: breach, clear, suppress, consolidate. The tools changed: flashbangs instead of stick grenades, submachine guns instead of pistols. But the methodology remained. Modern infantry doctrine, even in conventional forces, reflects WWI German innovations. Fire and movement, bounding overwatch, immediate action drills, and decentralized command are now universal. The US Marine Corps' infantry tactics, British Army section attacks, and Israeli Defense Forces' close combat doctrine all contain elements traceable to stormtrooper heritage. Training methods have evolved, but retain core concepts. Modern military training emphasizes realistic scenarios, live fire exercises, and repetition. Soldiers rehearse missions on mock-ups, just as Raw's men did in 1915. The acceptance of training casualties as necessary for combat effectiveness echoes German thinking, though modern safety standards are vastly higher. The cultural legacy is more complex. The term stormtrooper itself became tainted by association with Nazi Germany, where it was appropriated by the SA, the Sturmabteilung, the paramilitary brown shirts. This association obscures the World War I origins and the tactical innovations that had nothing to do with later ideologies. But the methods endure. When a modern infantry squad conducts a raid, when a special forces team assaults a compound, when soldiers clear a building room by room, they are executing tactics that will be recognizable to a German stormtrooper from 1918. The scale has changed, the technology has changed, the strategic context has changed, but the tactical fundamentals remain. The stormtroopers did not invent small unit combat. Soldiers have fought in small groups since the beginning of warfare, but they systematized it, refined it, trained it, and proved it under the most brutal conditions imaginable. They demonstrated that small units properly trained and led could achieve results that massed formations could not. That lesson has not been forgotten. In November 1918, Germany collapsed. The spring offensives had failed. The 100 Days Offensive smashed through German lines. American troops poured into France. The blockade strangled the home front. Revolution erupted in German cities. The Kaiser fled. The war ended not with a grand battle, but with exhaustion, starvation, and surrender. The stormtroopers did not win the war. They could not. Tactical brilliance cannot overcome strategic failure. Germany was outnumbered, outproduced, and blockaded. No amount of training, no sophistication of tactics, no courage or skill could change the fundamental arithmetic of the conflict. But the stormtroopers changed warfare. That they proved that firepower dominance could be overcome through tempo, shock, and decentralized action. They demonstrated that small units properly trained and led could punch through defenses that mass formations could not. They developed methods that became the foundation of modern infantry doctrine and the toolkit of modern special forces. The trenches of WWI were laboratories of horror, but also laboratories of innovation. Out of the mud and wire and blood, Germany created something new, a way of fighting that emphasized speed over mass, initiative over orders, violence of action over firepower. It was not enough to win the war, but it was enough to change the next 100 years. When modern soldiers train for close quarters battle, when special forces rehearse assaults, when infantry squads practice fire and movement, they are walking in the footsteps of men like Willie Raw and the soldiers of Stern Batty on number 5. The weapons have changed, the uniforms have changed, the battlefields have changed, but the principles endure. The stormtroopers were not superhumans. They were not invincible. They were soldiers, often young men, barely out of adolescence, asked to do the most dangerous work in the most terrible war humanity had yet seen. Many died. Most who survived were wounded or broken. Their sacrifices bought Germany time, but not victory. Yet their legacy outlasted the war that killed them. The tactics they pioneered, the methods they developed, the culture of initiative and aggression they embodied, these became the inheritance of every army that came after. By 1918, in the final desperate months of the war, Germany had learned to fight like the 20th century. They learned too late to save themselves, but the lesson survived them. In that sense, the stormtroopers won a victory that transcended their own defeat. They did not win the war, but they changed how wars are fought. One trench, one bunker, one squad, at A.